All right, welcome to part five, everybody. We're going to look at how to add in our main headline, like our cover story for this fictitious magazine called Skip. And we left off last time with making some layout decisions in terms of where the masthead was going to go, color of the masthead, as well as where we were going to put the photograph. And I think we were sort of there. I actually forgot to save it, so I had to go and make the design again. So it might look a little bit different, but I think it's mostly where it was. I've still got my inspirational images here because I'm looking at some sports magazines as well as some fashion magazines to help kind of guide me in terms of layout, in terms of like some of the color palette decisions, in terms of how I'm using typography. And what I want to kind of do before I get into like the look of this is, of course, to actually go back to the content that I generated in the design brief, right? And so you've all done this step. So make sure you have this document open because this is where you're going to get your references for the actual words you're going to be typing. And as we know, as much as design and aesthetic and all those wonderful visual things are important, the content is equally important in communication. So let's make sure that we've done a nice job of coming up with a good, catchy headline that relates to our story and hopefully is written well, and so that it grips the audience and intrigues them and is memorable. So for my cover story headline, I've got hottest new ropes of the season, what you need to know now. All right, so heading back to Illustrator here, we can see if we look at any of these magazines here that I've got as my kind of inspiring pieces, how do we know what the cover story is? Well, we just use visual hierarchy, again, to tell us about importance in a layout. And we know that the photograph is of primary importance, the masthead being secondary or possibly sharing primary spot. But the next stop we make is the next biggest piece of text, which in this case, it's Paralympic Pride. In the football magazine, we're looking at Off the Record. So we're going to get a story about NFL scouts telling us about all 32 teams. That's the subheadline there, which we're also going to use. You've got a piece here, which is written in German, perhaps, right? So even though I don't speak the language, I know that it must be this story here is the main cover story. Something about Brad Pitt should be nervous, maybe. Here we've got a story about looking great at any age. And then, of course, we've got Matt Damon, right? So what we know is that a couple things. We know that the font has to be the second biggest piece of font on the cover. It can't be bigger than the masthead or else it's going to be confusing. The viewer's not going to know which is which, right? And you might also notice here that there's a different font being used for the cover story, for the headline. So with GQ, you've got this great big sans serif all caps masthead for GQ. And then in a serif font, you've got Matt Damon here. So you've got contrast, right? You've got contrast in font, you've got contrast in size, and even some contrast in color. So no mistaking the separation of those elements. All right, so I'm going to try to learn from the pros here and go into my piece. Let me just remember, what was my headline again? Hottest new ropes of the season. Okay. So let's start by putting down, and remember, we don't want to type everything into like one long sentence. We actually want to have our words as separate pieces so that we can move them around and puzzle them together, which is a much more effective, and it's really a more creative way to design. It feels more like you're building a collage, which design really is. So I'm going to click my type tool. I'm going to click once. Oops, before I do that, let's make sure I lock my layers so I don't keep clicking them by accident. So I got my type tool. I'm going to click and make sure that I've actually made a new layer here. One more stop, layer 3. Let's call this headline. All right, now we're ready. Click. I'm going to go with a classic serif font, which is Times New Roman. Going to type in all caps, hottest. Oops. No caps. Let's try that again. Hottest. There we go. So I've got hottest, and I'm going to click on it with the black arrow. I'm going to hold shift, and I'm going to drag out that word. All right, so we've got hottest, and then we've got new ropes. So what I can actually do to save myself some time, instead of having to keep finding out that font size and like retyping that font, I can actually just make a copy of this, and I can just go Command C, Command V, or hold down Option on the Mac or Alt on the PC and drag out, right? And so then I'm able to go and edit that. So and I'm gonna hit the type tool, highlight that, and then what was the next one? New ropes. Okay, so I've got hottest new ropes. And then I've got my third piece of text. So again, click with the black arrow to kind of deselect the text. We're going to click again, drag down, grab the text tool, highlight of the, that could be its own thing. And then last but not least, we've got season. Okay, so what we have here, and this isn't how I want it to look, but this is a good start. I'm able to click on each one of these as a separate word, except of the is kind of, I'm treating it as one word. I might change that, but I think for now it could work. So what we want to start thinking about here is like, how are we going to maybe group these? And do any of these words have to be given more emphasis? All right, so I'm going to suggest that hottest gets a little bit bigger, because it's just a fun word that attracts attention. New ropes can be made a little smaller, because I'm going to go for some alignment on the left side. I think of the can be quite a bit smaller. And remember that I'm holding shift as I go here, right? And holding shift while dragging is actually going to allow me to make sure that that font doesn't get stretched out, okay? All right, so we've got hottest new ropes of the season. I might actually decide to make new ropes a little bit smaller so we can actually fit of the in the same line here as new ropes. Okay, now we're starting to get a little bit squished, and I might have overestimated what I could do with that. So back to bringing of the down here. I'm going to bring season up a little bit, and right now I'm just eyeballing things in terms of like where, how I'm lining them up. In order to take the guesswork out of that, I'm going to bring up the ruler, which is Command R or Control R, and then I'm going to drag out my little ruler or my guide. I'm going to zoom in with the Z tool, and now I can actually make sure that my alignment is good. I can see that it was pretty close, but of was a little bit to the right, and season was actually quite a bit to the right. So I'm just nudging it over with my left arrow key. Okay, so at this point, things are reading pretty well, which I'm pretty happy with. I think there's a lot of things I could probably still do to kind of play with where I place things. Like maybe season doesn't have to be nearly as big, and perhaps new ropes could be a lot bigger, because maybe we decide that's a lot more important than the word season. So again, we can continue to really make those creative decisions. I'm going to eyedropper this so it's exactly the same size as of the. And then I've actually got, yeah, you know what? I would argue that maybe that was the right choice. Maybe hottest can be just a little bit bigger. Okay. The last thing I'm going to do here, if I just zoom in, is just kind of try to make some small adjustments so that the letters aren't overlapping the rope there, because that's sort of interfering a little bit with readability. Oops. Group those. Okay, that looks pretty good. One thing that I want to do though is just make sure that my tracking looks good. All right, so we go to properties and we click on any one of these pieces of font. It's set to 0, like default tracking, which is over here, this VA, left and right arrow. But if we want to see if these letters need to be spaced out or tighter together, we can just click up or down. So if you click up, actually, if you hold shift, it'll go faster. Hold shift and click up, and you'll see that the letters start to space out more. They're not getting bigger. They're just getting more air between the letters. Okay, so I don't really like how that looks on hottest, but I've got a feeling that maybe of the season could work really well if I spaced it out. I'm actually going to just bring season over here, And I think if I just space out those letters a little bit more, I'm going to accomplish a couple things. It helps to create a little bit more of an alignment in terms of my text sort of fitting into this line. And if I zoom out, yeah, I think that looks pretty good. I think that works. Okay. All right, so the tracking tool is there for you to experiment with how tight or how loose your letters are, and if you want to make that decision. All right. It's got me thinking that maybe I should do that on Skip as well. If I go to Skip, just realized I didn't change the tracking here. I think Skip would look better if it was actually tighter. There we go. Okay, not bad. So that's a good start. We were looking at spacing, emphasis, alignment, and using the tracking tool. And then, of course, deciding on our typography. Okay. Yeah, one last thing I'm going to do here before I finish this part of the lesson is to just show you guys what would be a huge creative decision, but could perhaps be a really effective way to look at layout is, do you want your background color to be white? So if the answer is yes, then I guess you can continue. But in my case, I'm kind of curious to see what would happen if I had a dark gray background and maybe the lettering, like the Hottest New Ropes, was white. So what I need to do for that is to make a new layer. So this is layer 4, and I've dragged it down below the other layers. I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and I'm going to draw out a rectangle. So it actually, oops, try that again. Okay, one more time. There we go. Okay, that's red. Obviously, that's not the right color, but if I make it kind of a dark gray, right, that could look good. Again, I'm not set on this, but it's like anything we do in art. We always want to sort of try to see the what if in any concept, right? So now I can take all these and I can make them white. I think that actually looks pretty good. That's it for today.